Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Arwynne O'Neill, and today I'm here with my friend Katya, and we are going to be talking about the Mars-Jupiter opposition, which is coming up on October 28th. Thanks for joining me, Katya.
Hello. Thanks for having me back, Arwynne.
Well, okay, so this is interesting. Today, we're going to be talking about the opposition coming up on October 28th. But before we get into that, I just want to throw in a bunch of other stuff that's going on October 28th, because it's a busy day in the universe. We've got a full moon in Taurus and a lunar eclipse. And also, right now, all of the major planets are in Earth and water signs, which is just a weird, fascinating kind of thing that's happening. So a lot of those planets are in opposition, including, of course, the full moon. The full moon is opposite the sun. That's what makes it a full moon. And we've got this huge stellium in water and a stellium in Earth. And a lot of them are opposed to each other. And that means we have rationality and emotion in opposition, which is an interesting thing for the Halloween season. And yeah, it could either be beautiful or overwhelming, as my astro.com newsletter says. So that's something to look forward to.
Whoa, what a traffic jam.
Well, exactly. I mean, luckily they're in the negative or feminine signs, which is a little bit less aggressive than the air and fire signs. So hopefully it won't be too conflicty, but there could be some emotion versus rationality conflicts, which is awkward, but not too bad.
Got it.
So what we're talking about today is Mars and Jupiter. And last time we were here, the two of us talked about
Mars and Pluto.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And those are kind of malefic planets. They're like more aggressive and definitely they can be kind of scary and volatile. Jupiter and Mars are quite a bit of a different energy. Like we still have the aggression of Mars, but Jupiter is the planet of expansion. It's the planet of law. It was the king of the gods in Greek mythology. Jupiter was the godfather of all the gods. And so we've got that sort of expansive quality. And when that comes together with Mars, let me just read this passage from our favorite Stephen Arroyo. He says that Jupiter transits to Mars are characterized by physical vitality being enhanced. There's a tendency toward impatience and temperamental displays. At best, he says, while Jupiter is expanding the Mars energy, one feels enlivened by a greater energy and inspired by a heightened feeling to take courage and to tackle new challenges and undertake new initiatives. Sex drive is often amped up to an intense level, he says. And excellent, exactly. All methods of self-assertion are enhanced, and this allows people to feel a sense of mastery and confidence. Sometimes too much mastery and confidence, and maybe it's not backed up by anything solid. So people often feel stronger and more ambitious, he says, but their craving for leadership can be enlarged to the point of risk-taking, and their craving for adventure can sometimes result in overextending and taking risks that are too large and that they're not actually capable of achieving the goal that they're setting for themselves. The goal is to take advantage of that, but also to be realistic.
So last time we spoke about a Mars and Pluto square aspect. So is this opposition different, or how is it different?
Sure. Well, actually, they're both considered difficult aspects. So the square, like we talked about before, is kind of like when two cars come up to an intersection and one's going across traffic and the other's going the opposite direction, and they kind of have to, in lieu of having like a traffic signal, they have to kind of make eye contact and determine which one has the right of way, and otherwise there can be a collision. With the opposition, it's almost more of a flowing aspect because both of the planets are kind of going in the same direction. They're facing each other. So they could just butt heads directly and have a head-on collision completely, or they could exchange energies in a flowing kind of way because they can kind of just go right past each other and match each other in a way. So it's almost like the opposites attract thing where the one has what the other doesn't have. So this is oppositions are a little bit less difficult in some ways than squares. Squares are probably the most difficult and conflicting of the aspects because you're coming at cross purposes. And with the opposition, you can actually it's almost like a conjunction, but much more challenging.
Oh, in what way?
Well, let me just use this example. So we've got Mars and Jupiter, and Jupiter is obviously not a malefic. It's the biggest of the benefic planets. It's the biggest of the planets, but it's got this great expansive sort of positive jovial energy. And what I like to think of when I think of Jupiter, and this is a kind of funny example, but Tony Robbins, the inspirational speaker, he does these great like energetic speeches. He bounds around. He's a Pisces, and he's got a lot of planets in Pisces. And so that's ruled by Jupiter. And when I think of Jupiter, I think of Tony Robbins. I think of how he just bounds around. He just wants to make everybody's life better and bigger and happy, and using all of your talents, and, and just bringing all of this boundless energy and light to the world, and
very energetic, enthusiastic, expansive. Yes.
Right. So yeah, and also another person who had a lot of Jupiter was Winston Churchill. So just a big personality, like a lot of words, a lot of energy, a lot of charisma. So yeah, this is Jupiter as like personified. And then of course Mars, I mean, you just think of like the god of war, right? He's martial, he's energetic, and so when you have those two in opposition, there could be sparks, but at the same time they could really use each other's energy for positive. So here's what Robert Hand, who wrote this great book Planets in Transit, and I've read from this before, but it's like the Bible of transits. It's a great one. He says about Mars opposite Jupiter: this can be one of the so-called lucky transits, or it can be a time fraught with conflict. This transit represents the culmination of your efforts to expand the domain of your activities. So there's more and more that you want to do, and you resent anything that narrows your freedom and limits your scope of actions. That's Mars wanting to just go and do its thing and be expansive. The challenge of the transit is to be conscious of yourself and what you're doing so that you can plan intelligently and work effectively, and with the enlightened self-interest as opposed to just pure selfishness. The negative side of this transit is manifested when you're not conscious of what you're doing. You may act towards others in a domineering, overbearing manner, which causes them to desert you when you may need their help later. And you may try to come onto others more strongly than just coming, to them as an ordinary human being, which will make them want to test your strength or just run away from you. So you can be too belligerent or too aggressive or too overbearing and cause rifts in relationships that will not help you later on. So he says foolishly overestimating your abilities at this time can cause you to bite off more than you can chew. And if you do this on a physical level, you can exert yourself too much, exhaust your body, take foolish risks, and cause accidents. And this also could happen on a more emotional or just a resource level as well. You can overspend, you can overinvest, you can gamble too much. And this is a really, like, Mars and Jupiter are really an interesting thing when it comes to like gambling for some reason. I've seen this come up a lot. So if you do succeed, you can use this energy really well, but it's very easy to let it take over. Yeah.
Interesting. So it's like that acting on those feelings of maintaining optimism and faith. You're like, will I win? Will I not?
Yeah.
And we'll see where that leads us.
Exactly.
Oftentimes than not, it could lead us to a different spot than what we hoped for.
Right, exactly. Just like you're betting at the table and you just let it ride like one too many times because you're like, I'm on a roll, or, I'm on a winning streak. And then you kind of like forget, like, okay, no, the house always wins. You have to quit while you're ahead, or,
So harder to exercise restraint.
Yes.
In particular.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So where are Mars and Jupiter right now?
Yes. Good question. So Mars is actually in Scorpio. And as Jupiter is a really like slow moving planet, it takes about 12 years to go through the entire zodiac. It spends about like 1 year in each sign. So it's actually been in Taurus for a little while now. We did a previous episode on Jupiter in Taurus, which you can go and find on Spotify or on the Starzology website and hear all about that, because it's a super fascinating placement. And I'll read more about that in a bit. But first of all, let's just go into Mars in Scorpio. Mars is obviously, it's about your aggression, your assertion in your birth chart. It's about how you go after things that you want or people you want, or how you express yourself athletically, how you go after work that you want. And as Alison Price puts it, it's what gets you off the couch. So when Mars is in Scorpio, Mars in Scorpio asserts itself. Oh, and this is, of course, another quote here from Stephen Arroyo's Chart Interpretation Handbook, which is always great for these little sound bites about all the different planet placements. So Mars in Scorpio asserts itself intensely, magnetically, passionately, and powerfully. Its physical energy and initiative are prompted by strong desires, compulsions, and challenges, and it's capable of great endurance. So this is compared to something like Mars in Aries, which is just, it's all about those, quick bursts of fiery energy. And it's like the power lifter versus the endurance runner, So Mars in Scorpio is like the endurance runner, or maybe the sniper who lies in wait and just carefully targets its opponent and then is like just perfect. It's about the need to share deep emotional closeness and to experience profound intensity in its activities. So maybe it would be attracted to martial arts. It would be target practice, anything like bow and arrow or firearms. I know a really good friend of mine is super into like collecting like old firearms and like going to the just shooting range, and he's Canadian, he's not American, so that's it's an interesting. In the U.S. it's much more common, but yeah, he gets so excited about it, and it's just about personal mastery for him. He never would want to hunt animals. It's just about that actual just that practicing and increasing your score. He also plays disc golf with us, which is one of our little hobbies. All of these hobbies I can really see an interesting thread. He's also super into airplanes. Like we went to an air show and he was super fascinated by like all the different types of planes and stuff. So there's a really sort of an interesting martial quality to his interests. But yeah, it's all about like personal mastery. That's just an example of Mars in Scorpio, what it looks like in like athletic achievement. Mm-hmm. But it says also the decisiveness and freedom of expression can be hindered by secretiveness and a need for self-protection, which is a very Scorpio kind of thing. It's not the most ambitious of the Mars placements. It can kind of thwart itself sometimes because it might not reveal enough about itself to really be a great team player, but it can be used well, and it can be a great self-protective Mars. Some Mars placements are more foolishly aggressive or, self-aggrandizing, like Mars in Leo can be more self-aggrandizing and achievement-oriented, whereas the Mars in Scorpio is a little bit more cautious and self-protective.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where Mars is right now, and Jupiter is in Taurus, which we've talked about at length, but I'll go into just a couple of little keywords here. It's about connecting and improving life through money, possessions, and luxuries. It can be overly materialistic and wasteful, but it's also about the communication with nature. And since it is one of these it's not an outer planet, but it's one of the more slow-moving planets. So typically it brings up things to do with the physical world, with crops, with food, with your basic needs and goods and materials and stuff like that. So it's interesting that Jupiter is in Taurus right now, where so is Uranus, and those two are going to come into conjunction in 2024. This is one of the big aspects that's happening in 2024, and we'll definitely talk about that more in the spring because that's going to be a huge one. And that's really bringing a lot of these supply chain issues, crop shortages, food scarcity, and all of these things into play. Yeah.
So emotional swings are likelier as Mars wants immediate catharsis, while Jupiter urges perspective and possibly long-term contentment. So it's like quite opposite.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it, for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So we talked about the upcoming transit, but what does it look like in someone's chart?
Sure. So Mars and Jupiter, when they're like, I actually have Mars square Jupiter in my chart, so that's something. But Mars opposite Jupiter. So this is an interesting one. Again, Stephen Arroyo has a book all about Jupiter. And one of the things that he says about any Jupiter combination is that it can rival the sun for creativity, leadership, and the will for power, especially when it's combined with Mars. He says these people are strong-willed. They're constantly striving to expand the scope of their activities and influence. They can be so physically restless that they require constant action. This is, again, like I'm picturing Tony Robbins here. Mm-hmm. And they can become easily discontented if they don't have an outlet for their assertive urges. This is true of worldly achievements as well as sexual expression. He says, enthusiastically tackling all sorts of challenges comes naturally to them, and they rarely lack for self-confidence unless Mars is in a weak placement, he says, which I'm not sure if he would consider Mars in Scorpio to be a weak placement. I think more so that would be like Mars in Taurus, like I have. And I mean, just, full disclosure, like how that probably plays out for me. And I have Jupiter in Aquarius in my third house. So in the third house, that's the house of communication. And Mars is in my seventh house. And
I was just going to ask, check the houses that they occupy. What does that mean?
Exactly. So Mars is in my seventh house, which means I tend to sort of, and it's in Taurus. So Alison Price has said that this is definitely to do with my partner of choice, who is a Scorpio, and Scorpio is ruled by Mars, and he's a very outgoing, positive, athletic, cheerful person. So in some ways, you could say that I kind of tend to outsource those qualities to my partner, or that I need somebody to sort of inspire and stimulate those things in me, because I'm not just generally going to run out and start my own business or start my own athletic pursuit. I kind of have to be dragged off the couch. But once I'm dragged off the couch, that momentum, like I've got Mars and Taurus, and it's about solid and continuous motion. So once I'm pushed in a direction or dragged off the couch into a direction, then I'm like an unstoppable machine, and I just keep going.
Very cool.
Yeah. And of course, with Jupiter square Mars in my chart anyway, that's Jupiter is in my house of communication, and I am a writer, and I do have a podcast, and I obviously like to chat. So I would say that I definitely use that as an activity. Any kind of communication is a great activity. Oh, I love trivia. I love, any kind of games of trivia where my mind is tested. That's a definite. It's one of the only things I'm competitive about is trivia. On my phone, all the games are about words. Like I have the Scrabble Words with Friends game that I'm constantly playing. I definitely do the New York Times Wordle and Connections.
Oh, yeah.
Super into like word games. So yeah, that's how it plays out in my chart. But here are some interesting, I looked up some celebrities, because we always want celebrity examples.
I was hoping for this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't love a celebrity example?
Tell us more.
There are tons, but I'm just going to go with like a handful of ones that hopefully everybody has heard of. And then I'm going to sum it up with like what I think this means. Quick little phrase. So Mahatma Gandhi has Jupiter opposite Mars. Bruce Lee, Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, Jane Goodall, which is an awesome, if you just think about like...
Who I've met.
What?
I know.
How? When?
I was a child, but...
No, like, okay, no, we need to know about this.
Well, I'm put on the spot right now. I was at a conference in a way. It was a talk. I was in school, and we went to this seminar, and she was speaking, and I couldn't believe it, and I couldn't actually tell how grandiose this moment was until years later, because I was like, this person is old, and they know what they're talking about, and they're beautiful in how they talk about it, but I didn't really understand how momentous that occasion was until many years later, and I wish I asked her more questions. Oh, well, yeah. But I didn't at the time, because I was so young and so naive, But
looking
anyway,
back, you met one of the elemental nature goddesses of our time.
Oh, yes. And I wish I would say that she changed my life in crazy ways, but maybe she has, and I haven't connected the dots yet. Right. So we'll see. We'll see.
I think she's done enough for the world. Like, I don't know if we need it in our own lives, per se. Like, just knowing that she's doing all that stuff is, is good enough. It's like
absolutely
amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
But anyway, sorry.
So Jane. I mean, please. If you've met any of these others, interject.
Will do.
Richard Gere.
Nope.
Well known for his activism and his opinions and all that stuff. Brené Brown, self-help guru and prolific writer, and Notorious B.I.G., which interestingly, B.I.G. expansion, Jupiter, anyone? Queen Latifah. And since cities, they have their own charts because they have a date and a time of incorporation, Las Vegas has this aspect, which I find super fascinating because what I'm calling this aspect of Mars opposite Jupiter is go big or go home. And I think that really fits with all the people there and with Las Vegas, certainly.
Absolutely. So Mars is more of the inner conflict between acting on feelings in the moment, but Jupiter is more about that optimism, and it's like, let's gamble, let's take a risk, let's explore, let's see what happens.
Totally.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
And it represents a bunch more things, because Jupiter is it was like back in the day, like the origins of astrology, before we had outer planets, like they hadn't discovered Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto or any of those asteroids yet, but Saturn was the farthest out that they could actually physically see. So Jupiter and Saturn were the outer planets in the old school astrology, and they had this sort of opposite relationship. Saturn was like restriction and was kind of like the authoritarian dad, where Jupiter was like the dad who takes you on adventures and buys you all the gifts and is like the generous, supportive dad who wants you to make the best of yourself and that kind of thing. And then Saturn is like the dad who's like, don't stay late on a school night, and you know, you have to finish your homework or you're going to be working at the gas station. That kind of dad. Yeah, the disciplinarian dad. So
still like quite a bit of duality between that, like, you know, holding the grudge versus the forgiveness versus the, I guess, anger versus generosity or reconciliation, whatever that is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with these oppositions, especially since they're in Earth and water right now, like towards the end of October, it's not just Mars and Jupiter. We're going to have obviously the full moon, which is the sun opposite the moon. And we have a lunar eclipse, which we've talked about in a different podcast. And a bunch of other signs are just this massive sort of opposition that's going on. So we are going to see a lot of emotion versus rationality, forgiveness versus kind of trying to barrel through and do it your own way. We've got Mars obviously being in Scorpio, so maybe we won't always know what other people's motives are because there's this sort of hidden, cunning sort of aspect to that placement of Mars. And just to bring in the complication of, obviously this is what's happening out there, and how this affects you, anyone listening in your life, is going to depend a lot on whether those placements actually touch anything in your chart. So just to give a couple of numbers, right now Mars is going to be at 11 degrees Scorpio and Jupiter is going to be at 11 degrees Taurus. So they're in exact opposition on October 28th. And you can probably think the effects will be felt maybe a couple days before and after that exact date of October 28th. But yeah, if you have anything at 11 degrees Scorpio, 11 degrees Taurus, or 11 degrees Leo or Aquarius, because those are going to be the square signs to that opposition. So those will definitely get pulled into feeling that more than other people. If you have nothing in any of those, then you'll probably just sail through and you'll notice nothing and be like, what was all the big deal about?
Got it. And can you remind us or enlighten us? What's 11 degrees? What is like? Like how do you know this?
Okay, so the zodiac is 360 degrees total, and then you've got 12 signs, and they're divided into 360. So 360, there's like approximately 30 degrees per sign. Planets all move through that in various speeds. Jupiter, as I was saying, takes a year to go through a particular sign, so it's going to be in Taurus for a year. Saturn takes like 2.5 years per sign. Uranus takes 7 years. Neptune takes 12 years, and then Pluto takes between 12 and 30 something, because it's like this hugely elliptical orbit.
Incredible. So, this is all in your mind, that you're
not
even reading
those are
anything.
In my mind.
You're just remembering this stuff.
I mean, yeah, those are in my mind for sure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I stumbled a little bit over it. So the actual numbers though, like anyone can find out where all the planets are at any given time. You just go to your phone and say, where are all the planets right now? And it'll give you a list. I personally use astro.com for a lot of those things because they've got it's like a free ephemeris, which means it's the table of like where all the planets are at any given time, going back like thousands of years and going forward. Like I think it's from 4,000 BC to 4,000 AD or something. It's like a lot. So you can look up like the day you were born or any other date in the future or in the past of recorded history and find out where all the planets are. But there's also, if you're not like interested in looking at something that looks like a giant Excel spreadsheet with like little symbols in it, you can also just like write a search engine, like whatever day, and say like astrological chart for this date, this time, this place, whatever, and you can see whatever the placements are.
And at the moment, or at least coming up, you've got the compromise, the moderation, the patience, all these opposites in a way, with yourself and with others. Those are the things that we want to achieve or look for or strive for or endeavor to.
It's just like a way of keeping it in your mind. So astrology is like, obviously it's the birth of astronomy, so there's a huge scientific and mathematical element to it, but at the same time, when we use it nowadays, we're using it for our personal self-expression, to learn more about ourselves, and it's a metaphorical language. Like it's basically a metaphorical language that enables us to understand different concepts in a symbolic way, and to sort of look at the world in this framework where you can say, okay, what are some things that we can focus on this day or in this season or this year. And for some reason, just as a research astrologer, I find it fascinating that these things, when you look at history or when you look at individual people and their charts, that it all makes sense. And maybe it's confirmation bias or maybe it's something else, but for me, it works. And that's what matters. It's not like, how does it work? Is it magnetism? Is it, like, are there little like machine elves, like Terence McKenna said, that are manipulating these, is it like string theory?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it does seem to work. And that's what I like about it, is that it does tell a beautiful story that enables you to think about life in all these different facets and to focus on different things in life, different elements of life, different elements of the world at different times.
Yeah, it could also be magic, but it still helps us.
That's an option.
Yeah, it still helps us to operate in a smooth and positive way. And if it isn't, then it could give us more challenges, I guess.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
I like that. That's beautiful.
That about wraps it up for Jupiter and Mars.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Already.
This has been fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much, Arwynne.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely do this again soon.
I hope so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.